Good evening. You've arrived at a quiet place meant for rest. There is nothing you need to figure out here, nothing you need to understand fully, and nothing you need to remember. Tonight is not about reaching an answer. It isn't about solving a question or arriving at a conclusion. This is simply a slow, gentle science story, spoken softly and allowed to remain in the background as you rest. You don't need to listen closely. You don't need to follow every sentence. If your attention drifts, that's completely fine. If you notice a few words and then lose track of them, nothing is lost. The voice will continue at a steady pace, whether you're paying attention or not. It isn't here to guide you anywhere new. It's here to remain calm, predictable, and easy to ignore. Tonight's topic is simple and very broad. It has to do with space, and with the idea of whether space has an edge or whether it continues without end. This won't be treated as a mystery. There will be no speculation, no dramatic questions, no attempt to make the idea feel larger or more impressive than it already is. Everything you'll hear is based on well-established scientific understanding. Observations that have been measured, tested, and carefully described over time. When something is uncertain, it will be described gently, without emphasis. Nothing here depends on you holding on to details. Nothing later will rely on what comes earlier. The order doesn't matter. If you fall asleep at any point, that's expected. If you wake up later and hear a sentence or two, that's fine as well. The story does not build toward a moment you need to be present for. For now, all that matters is that you're here, resting, listening if you want to, not listening if you don't. There's no need to adjust your breathing, no need to prepare your body in any particular way. The body already understands how to move toward rest when nothing is being asked of it. The science will unfold quietly, slowly, evenly, and it will do so without urgency, just as the processes it describes do. As you continue resting, there's no need to change your position unless your body naturally wants to. If you're already comfortable, you can allow stillness to remain. Breathing is already happening on its own. There's nothing you need to adjust. No need to slow it down. No need to make it deeper. Each breath arrives, and then it leaves, without effort. The body knows how to do this without being guided. It has been doing it continuously, without interruption, long before you noticed it. You might become aware of the surface supporting you, the way your weight is already being carried. Nothing is being held up. Nothing is being balanced. Gravity is doing what it always does, evenly, quietly, without asking for attention. The muscles in your face may begin to soften, not because they're being told to relax, but because there's no reason for them to stay engaged. The area around the eyes can remain as it is. The jaw doesn't need to be held in place. The tongue can rest naturally. There's no instruction here to release anything, no requirement to let go. The body doesn't need perfect relaxation in order to rest. The shoulders may feel heavy, not pulled downward, just supported. Your arms are where they are. They don't need to be positioned evenly. They don't need symmetry. They can simply remain present. If there's any tension still there, it doesn't need to disappear. It can stay exactly as it is. Rest does not require complete ease. It only requires the absence of demand. The chest rises and falls at a pace that suits you. That pace may change slightly from one moment to the next. That's normal. Breathing adjusts constantly, without instruction, without permission. Lower in the body, the abdomen moves gently with each breath. There's no need to control it, no need to hold it in or push it out. Your legs are already supported. The weight of them is being carried by the surface beneath you. There's nothing to keep upright, nothing to stabilize. The feet don't need attention. They don't need warmth or sensation. They can remain distant and unremarkable. As the body remains supported in this way, the nervous system begins to notice something important. There is no task, no signal to respond to, no change being requested. This is often when activity in the mind starts to slow, not because it's being forced to, but because there's nothing pressing to react to. Thoughts may still appear, fragments of the day, images, unfinished phrases. They don't need to be followed. They don't need to be pushed away. They can pass through the mind the same way sounds pass through a quiet room, present for a moment, then gone. If your attention drifts away from these words, that's completely fine. The body doesn't require continuous input. The voice you're hearing isn't here to guide you toward a goal. It's here to remain steady, consistent, predictable. There's nowhere else to be, nothing else to prepare for. The night does not require readiness. You can continue resting exactly as you are, breathing, supported, unchanged. The body already knows how to remain still. It already knows how to rest. As the body remains settled, attention often becomes less focused on individual sensations. It can soften into a more general sense of steadiness. There isn't a clear boundary between being awake and resting deeply. Instead, there is a gradual shift, one that happens quietly, without announcement. In the natural world, many changes happen this way. Not in sudden steps, but through slow transitions that are easy to overlook. Light fades across the evening without a precise moment when day becomes night. Temperature lowers gradually, not all at once. Even sound tends to soften as activity decreases and distances feel larger. These changes do not require coordination. They do not respond to attention. They continue whether or not anyone is noticing them. The body is familiar with this kind of rhythm. It developed within environments shaped by repetition and slow variation, not by constant alertness or immediate response. Because of that, predictable patterns tend to feel safe. They don't demand quick decisions. They don't signal urgency. In science, many systems behave in the same way, especially when they involve large scales or long periods of time. Once a process is set in motion, it often continues steadily, guided by consistent conditions rather than sudden changes. These processes don't need correction. They don't require supervision. They persist simply because nothing is interrupting them. When scientists describe systems like this, they often rely on simple ideas repeated across many situations. The details can become complex, but the underlying behavior remains steady. This steadiness is part of what makes such descriptions easy to listen to. There's nothing hidden behind the words, no sudden turn waiting to appear, just continuity. In daily life, countless slow processes are always underway. They don't interrupt, they don't compete for attention. They form a quiet background beneath faster events. The mind doesn't need to track them closely. It only needs to recognize that they exist, stable, ongoing, unchanged by momentary shifts. This kind of awareness does not sharpen focus, it softens it. There's no need to imagine specific scenes or hold detailed images. If images appear on their own, they can pass naturally. What matters more is the sense of gradual movement, the feeling of things unfolding at a pace that does not rush toward an outcome. In this state, time can begin to feel less defined,
Minutes don't need to be counted. There is no sequence to follow. The voice continues at the same even pace, not to hold attention, but to provide a steady reference point, something consistent enough that the mind doesn't need to stay alert. This is often when thinking becomes less verbal, less structured, not because it disappears, but because it no longer needs to organize itself around tasks or decisions.
Rest does not arrive suddenly. It settles in layers. First in the body, then in the breath, and gradually in the spaces between thoughts. There is no need to notice when this happens, no need to mark the transition. The process continues on its own. And as it does, the science story can begin to take shape, quietly, moving at the same unhurried pace as the slow processes it will describe. When the word space is used in science, it does not point to a single object. It is not a place you can hold or touch. And it is not an idea meant to feel abstract or mysterious. In the simplest sense, space refers to the distances between things, the separation that allows objects to exist without overlapping, the environment in which matter and energy are arranged. Space is not something added on top of the universe. It is part of how the universe is structured. When scientists describe space, they are not describing emptiness in a poetic way. They are describing a framework, a way of accounting for position, movement, and distance. Even where there appears to be very little matter, space is still present. Light moves through it. Radiation passes through it. Gravitational effects extend across it. This means that space is not the same as nothing, but it is also not a substance on its own. It does not behave like a fluid. It does not flow. And it does not act with intention. It simply provides the setting in which physical processes occur. On very small scales, space allows atoms to exist without collapsing into one another. On larger scales, it allows planets, stars, and galaxies to remain separated by vast distances. These distances are not decorative. They are necessary for stability. Without space between objects, motion would not be possible. Change would not unfold gradually. Everything would be compressed into a single state. So when science talks about space, it is often talking about room. Room for motion, room for interaction, room for time to pass without immediate consequence. This idea does not require imagination. It does not require visualizing an endless void. It can be understood simply as the way distance exists. Space also does not need to be observed in order to remain. It does not appear because something is looking at it, and it does not disappear when attention moves elsewhere. It remains consistent whether or not it is being considered. In scientific descriptions, space is measured. Distances are compared. Relationships between objects are described using position and separation. These descriptions do not rely on metaphor. They rely on observation and consistency. When space is discussed at very large scales, the same basic idea applies. The distances are larger, the structures are more complex, but the role of space remains the same. It provides separation. It allows motion. It supports change without forcing it to happen all at once. There is no need to imagine the full extent of space, no need to picture where it might begin or end. For now, it is enough to recognize that space is how distance exists in the universe. Quietly, evenly, without preference. It does not expand to create meaning. It does not contract to signal importance. It simply remains available. And because it behaves in this consistent way, it does not demand attention. It does not require interpretation. It allows everything else to move at its own pace. As these ideas settle, they do not need to stay clearly defined. They can soften. They can remain in the background. The details are not something to hold on to. They are simply part of the steady framework the universe continues to use. When scientists talk about the size of the universe, they often begin with a careful distinction. They separate what can be observed from what may exist beyond observation. This is where the idea of the observable universe comes in. The observable universe does not describe everything that exists. It describes everything that can be seen or measured from our position, given the limits of time and light. Light does not travel instantly. It moves at a finite speed. Because of this, looking farther away also means looking further back in time. Objects that are very distant are not being seen as they are now. They are being seen as they were when their light began its journey. There is a point beyond which light has not had enough time to reach us, not because there is nothing there, but because the universe has not existed long enough for information from those regions to arrive. This boundary is not a physical wall. It is not an edge you could approach or touch. It is simply a limit created by time and distance. Within this observable region, scientists can study galaxies, clusters, and large-scale structure. They can measure how matter is distributed. They can observe patterns that repeat over vast distances. These observations are consistent. They follow the same physical laws everywhere they have been measured. Because of this consistency, scientists can build models that describe how the universe behaves on large scales. These models do not require guessing what lies beyond what can be seen. They are based on what is observable. It is important to notice that the observable universe is not static. It is not fixed in size. As time passes, light from more distant regions has the opportunity to reach us. At the same time, the expansion of space affects which regions remain observable. This means that the boundary of what can be seen is shaped by more than one process: time, distance, and the way space itself changes. None of this implies an outer edge to space. It only describes the reach of observation. From within the observable universe, space appears smooth on very large scales. Matter is not evenly spread in small detail, but when viewed broadly, patterns emerge. These patterns do not depend on where the observation is made. They do not suggest a center or a preferred direction. This lack of a center is significant. It suggests that the observable universe does not sit inside a larger structure with an obvious middle point. Instead, the same kinds of structures appear in every direction that can be observed. Because of this, scientists avoid describing the observable universe as a container. It is not a box holding everything else. It is better understood as a region defined by what can currently be accessed through observation. Beyond that region, science does not claim absence. It simply acknowledges uncertainty. There may be more space beyond what can be seen. There may be similar structures repeating, or conditions may differ in ways that cannot yet be measured. What matters is that these possibilities are not required in order to describe what is observed. The observable universe is sufficient for building reliable scientific descriptions. It allows predictions to be tested. It allows measurements to be compared. It does not ask for conclusions about what lies beyond. This restraint is intentional. Science tends to move carefully when approaching limits. It describes what can be known, and it leaves open what cannot yet be reached. For the purpose of rest, there is no need to imagine what lies beyond the observable universe. No need to picture vast regions extending outward. It is enough to recognize that what is seen is not assumed to be all that exists. The observable universe is not the universe itself. It is a window shaped by time, by distance, and by the steady behavior of light. As these ideas remain present, they do not need to stay clear. They do not need to be organized or remembered. They can soften into a general sense of scale, of limits that are not boundaries, and of observation that does not define existence. The details can fade. The underlying steadiness remains. The question of whether space is finite or infinite often sounds simple, but in science, it is treated with care. This is because the question reaches beyond what can be directly observed. Based on what has been measured so far, science does not claim a final answer. Instead, it describes what current models allow and what they do not require. One possibility is that space is infinite. In this case, it would continue without edge or boundary. There would be no outer limit to reach. Another possibility is that space is finite but unbounded. This means it could have a total size without having an edge. These two ideas are different, but they are not easy to distinguish through observation alone. A finite but unbounded space does not end in a wall or a border. It does not require an outside. It simply curves in such a way that traveling far enough in one direction could eventually bring you back to where you started. This description does not imply looping paths or repeated locations in everyday terms. It refers to the geometry of space itself. Importantly, both possibilities are consistent with what has been observed so far. Measurements of large-scale structure show that space appears smooth and uniform. There is no detectable edge, no preferred direction, no sign of a boundary within the observable universe. Because of this, current models do not require space to be finite or infinite in a practical sense. They allow for both. When scientists speak carefully, they often say that space may be infinite, or that it may be finite in a way that has no boundary. These statements are not meant to sound uncertain or vague. They reflect the limits of what observation can currently resolve. Science does not assume infinity because it sounds impressive, and it does not assume finiteness because it feels more intuitive. It stays close to what can be tested. What matters most is that none of these possibilities change the behavior of space within the observable universe. The same physical laws apply. The same patterns appear. Whether space extends without limit or curves back on itself over scales far beyond observation, the local behavior remains the same. For everyday purposes, and even for most scientific work, this distinction does not create urgency. It does not affect how galaxies move. It does not alter how light travels. It does not change how time passes. This is why science can continue without resolving the question definitively. The universe does not require an answer in order to function. From the perspective of rest, there is no need to decide between these possibilities. No need to favor one interpretation over another. Both describe space as something that does not present an immediate boundary. Both describe a setting without an edge you could encounter. In that sense, space behaves as if it continues, quietly, evenly, without interruption. The language of science remains careful here. It does not move beyond what evidence supports, and it does not fill gaps with imagination. Instead, it allows the question to remain open, not as a mystery to solve, but as a description that does not need to be complete in order to be accurate. At this point, there is nothing more required from the idea. No further conclusion is necessary. The core description is already in place. Space shows no edge within what can be observed, and beyond that, science does not rush to claim more. As these thoughts remain present, they do not need to be held tightly. They can remain loose, undemanding. The question has been addressed gently, and there is no need to stay with it. At this point, there is no need to keep track of what has already been said. Nothing here depends on remembering details. The ideas introduced so far do not build toward a conclusion that needs to be reached. They do not lead to a final statement or a moment of clarity. They simply describe what can be known, and then remain steady. Space has been described as having no observable edge, as something that allows distance to exist, as something that does not require a boundary in order to behave consistently. These descriptions are sufficient. They do not need to be expanded further. There is no advantage in holding on to them now, no benefit in reviewing or organizing them. From here, listening does not need to be active. If words are heard, they can be heard without interpretation. If sentences drift past without forming clear meaning, that is completely fine. Nothing important is being introduced from this point forward. No new ideas will appear. No additional explanation will be required. The steady rhythm is enough. The observable universe continues as it has. Space continues behaving in the same quiet way. The question of infinity does not move toward resolution. It does not need to. The processes described are not affected by attention. They do not change when they are followed, and they do not change when they are ignored. This is often where awareness begins to soften further, where words lose their edges, where meaning becomes less distinct. The body remains supported. Breathing continues on its own. Nothing has shifted suddenly. The environment is unchanged. There is no signal that something new is about to happen, no cue to stay alert. If attention fades, it fades naturally. If it returns briefly, it can drift again just as easily. There is no correct way to experience this moment. Some nights, rest arrives quickly. Other nights, it arrives in layers. Both are normal. The voice remains consistent. The pace does not change. The tone stays even. There is nothing to prepare for, nothing to wait for. From here on, the information density continues to decrease. The story does not move forward in the usual sense. It simply remains present. And in that steadiness, there is room for sleep to arrive, quietly, without effort, and without needing to be noticed at all. Space continues in the same way it has been described. There is no change in direction, no increase in pace. It does not move toward an edge, and it does not need to. Within what can be observed, space behaves consistently. It allows distance. It allows motion. It allows time to pass without interruption. These descriptions do not shift from one moment to the next. They remain steady. Expansion, where it is observed, does not happen with urgency. It does not push outward into something else. It does not require a destination. It is simply a gradual change in how distances relate to one another. There is no need to picture this change, no need to imagine space stretching or unfolding. The description is enough. Space does not hurry. It does not pause. It does not respond to being noticed. It continues because the conditions that shape it remain in place. The observable universe continues to exist as it has. Galaxies remain separated by large distances. Light continues traveling along the same paths. These patterns repeat. They do not build. They do not resolve. The repetition is intentional. Repetition allows attention to loosen. When nothing new is introduced, the mind does not need to stay alert. Words may still be heard, but they do not need to be connected. Phrases can arrive and fade without forming clear ideas. Space continues, not as a concept to examine, but as a condition that remains. There is no signal of change, no shift in tone, no transition to something new. The same descriptions return gently, not to explain more, but to maintain rhythm. Expansion continues, distance remains, time passes. Nothing here depends on outcome. The question of infinity does not move closer to an answer. It does not need to. The behavior of space remains the same either way. There is no pressure to understand this, no advantage in following each sentence. Listening can remain passive. The voice continues. Steady, even. It does not require response. If the words begin to blur together, that is expected. If pauses feel longer, that is fine. The rhythm does not change. Space remains as it has been described, open, without edge. And the repetition continues quietly, allowing attention to soften, allowing the night to unfold at its own pace. As the repetition continues, the idea of scale no longer needs to stay clear. Large and small do not need to be compared. Near and far do not need to be measured. The mind does not need to hold on to distances. It does not need to keep track of how much space there is or where anything might be. Numbers are not required. Sizes are not required. The sense of far away can soften. The sense of very large can fade. These descriptions were never meant to be visualized precisely. They were only meant to suggest that space does not press in. It does not crowd. It does not close. As attention settles further, even that suggestion can loosen. Distance becomes less defined, not because it disappears, but because it no longer needs to be represented. There is no task that depends on imagining scale correctly, no outcome that depends on keeping it in mind. Space does not become more real when it is pictured, and it does not become less real when it is not. It continues either way. The same is true for time. Moments pass without needing to be counted. Intervals do not need labels. The voice continues at the same pace. But the words no longer need to connect. They can arrive without forming a sequence. They can pass without being followed. The sense of how much or how far can drift out of focus. Nothing here requires comparison. The universe does not ask to be imagined. It does not require a sense of scale in order to behave. From this point, descriptions are no longer about understanding. They are about maintaining steadiness. Space remains open, not in size, but in quality. It does not restrict. It does not narrow. There is room for motion, room for change, room for rest. As these ideas soften, they do not need to be replaced. They can remain incomplete. The mind does not need to resolve them. Distance loses importance. Scale loses definition. What remains is the sense that nothing is closing in. Nothing is ending. The night continues without edge. The space around you remains unchanged, and attention can rest without needing to know where anything begins or ends. Over very long periods of time, change happens without being noticed. Not in moments, not in events, but gradually, through small adjustments that do not announce themselves. This kind of time does not feel like a sequence. It does not move from one point to another in a way that can be tracked. It unfolds quietly. In descriptions of the universe, this long sense of time is often present, not as a timeline to follow, but as a background in which processes continue. There is no single moment when space became what it is now, no instant that needs to be remembered. The conditions that shape space persist. They do not rush. They do not move toward a conclusion. Over long durations, distances can change slowly. Relationships between objects can shift. But these changes do not create edges. They do not mark beginnings or endings. They simply continue. Time, in this sense, does not point forward or backward in a meaningful way. It does not ask to be measured. It allows motion to remain gentle. It allows structure to hold without strain. From one moment to the next, nothing appears different. And yet, over long spans, everything continues to adjust. This does not create urgency. It removes it. There is no deadline embedded in this kind of time. No final state waiting to be reached. The universe does not move toward a stopping point, and it does not circle around a finish. It remains in motion without direction. This does not require attention. It does not require understanding. It simply provides continuity. As the night continues, this sense of long time can remain distant. It does not need to be felt. There is no need to imagine far futures or distant pasts. It is enough to know that nothing here is approaching an edge. Space does not end because time passes, and time does not demand change. They remain together, quietly, without boundary. And as these descriptions soften further, they no longer need to stay complete. They can remain unfinished, unresolved, just like the processes they describe. The rhythm continues. Nothing shifts, nothing resolves. Space remains as it has been described, open, unchanging. There is no new information arriving now, no idea to follow, no direction to move toward. Words continue, but they no longer need to connect. They can exist as sound, arriving, passing. Pauses may feel longer. That is intentional. The space between phrases is part of the rhythm. It does not need to be filled. Breathing continues without being noticed. The body remains supported. Nothing requires adjustment. The night does not ask for attention. It allows stillness. If thoughts appear, they do not need to be completed. They can dissolve before taking shape. Sentences do not need to finish. Meaning does not need to form. The voice remains steady, even, predictable. There are no signals of change, no shift in tone, no moment to wait for. The descriptions have already done what they needed to do. They are no longer needed. Space continues. Time continues, without emphasis. The question of infinity does not return. It does not need to. The mind does not benefit from holding on to it. Words may blur together now. Edges soften. Transitions fade. Nothing important is being said, and that is enough. The rhythm remains gentle, uninterrupted. The same calm presence continues in the background, not guiding, not leading, just remaining. If sleep has already arrived, nothing here depends on being heard. If awareness returns briefly, it can drift again without effort. There is no ending approaching, no final statement waiting. The night continues without signal, without boundary. The words are no longer carrying information. They are only carrying pace, and that pace does not need to be followed. The rhythm remains. There is no shift in pace, no change in direction. Space continues without needing to be defined. Time continues without needing to be counted. Nothing here is moving toward an ending. The same quiet conditions remain in place. Distance does not close. Nothing approaches an edge. Breathing continues on its own. The body stays supported. There is nothing to hold. Words arrive softly, then fade. They do not need to be understood. They do not need to be remembered. The night does not respond to attention. It does not change when awareness fades. If sleep is already present, everything continues without interruption. If awareness lingers, it can soften further. There's no signal to stay awake, no reason to follow what comes next. Space does not become more complete when it is observed, and it does not lose anything when it is ignored. It remains as it is, open, unbounded in experience. The idea of infinity does not need to return. It has already loosened. Nothing needs to be resolved. The voice remains quiet and even, not guiding, not concluding, just present. The rhythm continues. The night continues. And everything that matters is already in place. Nothing more is required.